Glad you can join me today. And it's essential that we discuss the issue of victimhood and how the victimhood mentality is dangerous, not only for the poor individuals suffering from it and those that are close to them, but for our culture as well. I'm Barry Kibrick, and we can see the seeds of it happening already. And it's our responsibility to nip it in the bud and break the chains of victimhood and the dangerous effect it has not only on the individual, but the toll it will take on the rest of us. In clinical psychology, a victim mentality or complex describes a personality trait of someone who believes they are constantly the victims of hurtful actions by others, even when they are made aware of evidence to the contrary. They're imprisoned by their belief that they have no responsibility regardless the circumstances they may find themselves in. Now, this is very different from those who are victims of outside circumstances. If people are physically or mentally abused or suffer from real trauma, falling into a victim mentality may just be a natural state. Yet, they too do not have to stay there and make it a permanent state, even for them. But be clear, it is very different. This is not a blame the victim situation. Like all types of grief, we cannot possibly judge how a person reacts to any situation they're faced with. But what we do need to do for our own preservation is make sure we don't fall prisoner to the victimhood mentality. And most importantly, be aware of it when we see it in others and sometimes even the society at large. But a victimhood mentality will hurt us in the long term more than the act that caused it in the first place. But for so many, especially in recent times, even the slightest of transgressions, what sociologists and psychologists now call micro-transgressions, it can turn a person into a victim mindset when there's no actual harm whatsoever. Here's a classic recent example. Rutgers University, a few years back, invited former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice to give the commencement address at the college. Out of tens of thousands of students who attend the university, a small handful were boisterously protesting that Dr. Rice would cause them emotional harm just by the mere fact she'd be allowed to speak. Now, at first, one might think these may have been racist or sexist groups who were against hearing from the first Secretary of State, who was an African-American woman. But that was not the case. The reasons were vague, but mostly had to do with the fact that she was the Secretary of State during the President Bush administration and was called by the students a warmonger. And they were offended just by her mere ability to speak there. The university itself denied that, and they never revoked the invitation for her to give the commencement address. It just became such a disturbance on campus that Miss Rice herself didn't want to spoil the joys of a graduation ceremony. Now, 2 years later, President Obama was invited to give the commencement speech at Rutgers. Thankfully, there were no protests, but President Obama knew how bad a micro-transgression of this sort was for the country. And in his speech, he reprimanded the students. He said that he may have disagreed with some of the policies of Dr. Rice, but that the mere notion that the university or this country would be better served by not hearing from what a former Secretary of State would have to say, well, he said it's misguided, and that's not how democracy works. He ended the statement by even adding this: we must be willing to listen to each other. The victim mentality, when seen like this, belittles everyone. It's not healthy for the individual or the society. However, it can be broken, even with just a little movement in the correct direction. The author Richard Bach, who wrote the best-selling novel Jonathan Livingston Seagull, said it this way: if it's never our fault, we can't take responsibility for it. If we can't take responsibility for it, we'll always be the victim. And taking responsibility is always different than feeling blame. To blame oneself is in itself a form of victimization, because it takes away the power of responsibility and leaves only despair in its wake. You see, responsibility is simply our ability to respond. There's no blame attached to it whatsoever. But there is awareness. And the first thing to be aware of is that, as sad as it may sound, many people find comfort in being the victim because it takes away the pressure of having to be responsible. It oftentimes is easier to break the stranglehold of victimhood if you're actually a victim of an outside trauma. But when it's in your own mind that shifts you into that situation, it could be much harder to get out of. The reason is it's easier to identify the cause behind a traumatic victimization than a self-victimization. For the minute we put the blame on ourselves, it's too burdensome. You must do all in your power to break free from that, whether it's via psychotherapy, medication, spiritual or ritual practices. Whatever it takes, you can't go there. And if you find yourself there, you gotta get out. You got to get out, because having a victim disposition creates a spiraling negative outlook and deepens our own imbalance. It not only hurts you and I, but it hurts all those around us. For the people that love us suffer when we suffer. Victimhood is a very selfish form of behavior. It's a false shield from really facing the world. After all, if you are a victim of circumstance beyond your control, in your mind, you'd have every right to pull up the sheets and stay in bed due to the fear that something will happen to you. And that is no way to fully live a life. The action to break free from this has to deal with the internal dialogue you and I have inside our head. but it's not as simple as turning negative thoughts into positive ones. What you have to do is step outside of your head and give yourself the advice you'd give to a friend who was experiencing a sense of victimhood. We can always marvel at the good others are doing, even when we cannot see it in ourselves. That is why you have to see it from a different perspective. A perspective how can I put this? How you would talk to someone else and not yourself. The reason is that unless you are a pure narcissist, it is human nature to see the better things in others, unfortunately, sometimes than it is in ourselves. You really must examine yourself as if you are consoling a dear friend and seeing the beauty and good they possess, even when they're feeling at their lowest point. And then there is this key ingredient to breaking out of the victimhood mentality: patience. Patience, especially for ourselves. So many times we never give ourselves the patience we need. For there is a reason why we do not always see our inner self in the best of light. Why we may fall into the victimhood trap, but we have to break out because it holds us back from really looking deep into ourselves and being responsible for seeking the light we truly need to seek. The light of knowledge, wisdom, happiness, love, whatever you name it, you know you want to experience that joy. You and I can do this. We can be the light that illuminates not only ourselves, but all those in our sphere and outside of our sphere as well. Till next time, no longer victimhood, but believe it or not, let's go on to victory.
Thank you for watching. It's a joy and a privilege to bring this show to you. Hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss an episode. And please visit our Patreon page by clicking the link below. We so appreciate your support, and thank you so very much.